Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Fireside Chat with Rich and Matt, Great Rivers of Africa, presented by NatHab Expedition Leaders Matt Meyer and Richard Digavea. It's a pleasure to have you both with us today. Richard, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Thanks, Kendall. And welcome, guys. It's really nice to be back with you. It feels like an age since we last did a chat, so it's exciting to be back and doing things. Let's go into our cool pictures. So here I am with I'm the not so furry one on the left. And I have been guiding with NatHab this will be my 7th year now. And I do Africa and some cool places. And my friend Matt, give yourself a little intro there, bud.
Well, I'm the furry one on the right, but I'm wearing a cap. And I've been with NatHab now for going on 4 years. And yeah, it's great to be back here. It does feel like it's been an age since the last time we had one of our fireside chats. And we've got a really cool topic on great African rivers today, where we'll touch base on some of the most prolific, some of the biggest, longest, most well-known and famous rivers that run through this great continent of Africa. So you can see there in that main map of Africa just how much of the continent is made up and comprises of river basins, with the exception of the Great Saharan Desert in the northern section there. You've got a couple of little rivulets up in Morocco, and then the northern highlands there of Northwest Africa, and going down through the rest of it, through West Africa. Those are obviously your coastal and your equatorial forests, and then all the way down into central, northeastern and southern Africa. And the major river systems that we're going to be talking about today will be the Nile River that runs northwards in North Africa, the Congo River, which runs north and west in West Africa and Central Africa, and then the Okavango and the Zambezi in Southern Africa. So the Nile River, we're looking at arguably the longest river in the world. It's sitting at just about 6,500 kilometers. So a good, 4,200 odd miles. Arguably, I said, because it's still a topic of hot contention between whether it's the Nile River or if it's the Amazon River in South America. And the reason for that being is that there's still no exact location of the source of the Nile. It's been moved, the post has been moved several times over the last couple of decades and centuries, and they think right now that the headwater and the first source of it is in northern Rwanda. But in any case, the Nile is comprised of these two great rivers, the Blue and the White Nile, and they converge about a third of their journey down in Sudan. They start respectively in Ethiopia at Lake Tana, and then Uganda in Lake Victoria. And they then, as I mentioned, they then join in Sudan, just near their capital of Khartoum, and go all the way through to one of the largest deltas in the world, the Nile Delta, which then flows into the Mediterranean. Now, historically, everyone knows the Nile for the Egyptians, for papyrus, for the hippos, the Nile perch. Arguably one of the first places where an actual civilization and recognizable nation were the Egyptians about 6,000 or so years ago. And it's just this fascinating mishmash of cultures. Lately, the biggest thing about it has been the conflict between the three nations that comprise the largest portions of it, not the longest, but the largest, because 80% of the water that flows down the Nile River comes out of Ethiopia and the Ethiopian highlands and the headwaters just below that. So it flows from Ethiopia into Sudan, and this is the blue Nile. So the blue Nile and the white Nile, the blue, it's not the black Nile, but the blue Nile signifies the color of the sediment that gets washed down from the Ethiopian highlands. So it gives it almost a black color, and that's the silt, and that gets washed down through the entirety of the river until it gets down to the very slow moving delta, and that's where it settles, and that's what made the Nile Delta so fertile for the Egyptians, was the silt that was washed down. And so that's obviously eroded over the years, but now you've got Ethiopia that are building dams for hydroelectric power. Then you've got Sudan that are building dams for hydroelectric power. 80% of Sudan's electricity comes from hydroelectricity generated off of the Nile River. And then it goes down into Egypt. So if you've got these two walls, or three or several walls that have been put up going down, by the time you get into Egypt, there isn't much left. So the general sort of topography of the Nile River is changing because of the restriction of the water flow. But going back to when the Egyptians were there, you've got this area that is very easily defensible, and that's what made it and set it up as one of the first civilizations, because you had the Mediterranean north of you, you had the Red Sea to your east, and then to your west you had this desert. So it's a very easy area to defend. And now, as it's moved, as obviously the Egyptians were conquered and they had to move on and move off, it is still a huge area for population. You've got close on 100 or so million people living in Egypt now, close on that 110, 120 in Ethiopia. So almost a quarter of Africa's population lives down this river. And the actual basin of the Nile River comprises just over 10% of the entire landmass of the continent of Africa. And this is kind of where I'm going to hand over now to Rich to talk about another river that makes up a very similar footprint and has similar correlations to the Nile.
Thanks, Matt. And I know the Nile has always been a river that we've all learnt about through time because of the Egyptians and the historic things that happened around it. The Congo River is a little bit less known, and it was formed between 1.5 and 2 million years ago and is 2,900 miles long. So it is an incredibly long river, second longest in Africa, rising in the highlands of Zambia between Lake Tanganyika and Lake Nyasa at elevation of about 5,700 feet. Now, when we look at this image, the source over here between Nyasa and Lake Tanganyika is only 430 miles away from the Indian Ocean, the opposite side of Africa. So it travels a huge distance, and it flows in this counterclockwise way from south of the equator, over the equator, and north of the equator, making it one of the only river that flows both north and south of the equator. Now, the drainage basin is immense. It is about 1,335,000 square miles. It was a mouthful, but and it covers the entirety of the Democratic Republic of Congo, most of the Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, Eastern Zambia, Northern Angola, and parts of Cameroon and Tanzania. So it's this huge area, and it covers 13% of Africa's landmass. So it covers even more landmass in terms of its drainage basin than what the Nile does, even though the Nile's longer. Now, this whole crossing the equator twice helps with the flow, because what ends up happening is you have rainy seasons both at different times north of the equator and south of the equator, so that river is always being fed. And because of the flow, the runoff on this is second only to the Amazon, and it is one of the deepest rivers with depths that are greater than 720 feet. I cannot even comprehend the idea that a river cuts in that deep. So you can imagine how unexplored the whole thing is. And what it feeds is the second largest rainforest in the world, being the Congo rainforest. And we're going to go into a couple of the animals, but before we do that, Matt was already touching in on hydropower, and hydropower on this, especially within a continent like Africa, where we are a little bit looking for ways to sustainably do things. Not that hydro is always the most sustainable, but this is the most powerful river in Africa. Over the rainy season, you can have 1.8 million cubic feet of water per second entering into the Atlantic. So it's a massive amount, and scientists have calculated that 13% of the world's hydro potential lies on this one river. So, I mean, there's a massive potential. It would provide sufficient power for the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa. Can you imagine what that would do for development within the continent? Now, I worked for our power generation company, and they announced a project where they were going to try and do this and create upgrade some existing infrastructure as well as create new infrastructure. And that would have created 40 gigawatts of electricity just off of that. And there was talk when they were doing that there would be enough to give sub-Saharan Africa and parts of the Mediterranean just at the current need that they were doing. Unfortunately, we fell way short of the mark. But as of 2009, 800 different fish species were recorded there. And if these hydroelectric plants, there's one over here that you can see built, so they have some going, but if all of these had gone through, these fish species would have been in grave danger of extinction. There is an incredible waterfall along with others, but this is called the Inga waterfall that is along the Congo River. But the largest sections remain virtually unstudied. And it's so big that the river's been divided into different eco regions along the river because of this. It's so diverse. There are over 1,000 different bird species and 400 mammal species. So what I wanted to touch on were a couple of these mammal species. In previous talks, we've touched on the mountain gorillas. There are mountain gorillas within this area, but what we haven't touched on are the lowland gorillas. Now, we have the western lowland gorilla, which these guys, the lowland gorillas in general, are a little bit smaller. They weigh in between 150 and 400 pounds. And the western lowland gorillas numbers are around 360,000 individuals as per a census in 2018. So there's some really good numbers as opposed to the mountain gorillas, which have just got over 1,000. So you can see that these guys are a little less threatened. But it's believed that in the early 2000s, that a third of the population was wiped out by Ebola, a disease that we are all terrified about. Travel at that time went a little haywire for all of us, but it also affects these animals. The eastern lowland gorilla, these guys here, we often see these guys in zoos, either the eastern or the western, because the mountain gorilla cannot be put in a zoo, they die in captivity. And in the mid-1990s, they were believed to be around 17,000 individuals, but populations are believed to be plummeted by about 50%. And there's no accurate accounting for what the numbers are like now because the area is so dangerous. There's a lot of human conflict going on in the area. Bonobos, a very close cousin to the chimpanzee, and in fact, an even closer cousin to us, sharing 98.7% of our DNA. And they are the most bipedal of all the apes, spending about 20 to 25% of their time on their hindquarters. They use sex, which is a cool topic for these guys, but they use it to reinforce bonds, to relieve stress, anxiety, and anger, and even to move up in social status. So quite fascinating things. And they even self-medicate by ingesting certain leaves, and will even make concoctions of different leaves to create medicinal bounties, which is awesome. They're solely found in the Democratic Republic of Congo and are classified as endangered and are still killed in a lot of hunting incidences, also with babies being sold as pets, often with other people, with other things, with other adults dying in the process. And then forest elephants, a different subspecies to our African elephant. They live purely in these rainforests. They're smaller than the savanna cousins and live for between 60 and 70 years. They have straight tusks that come straight out and point straight down, and have rounded ears, as opposed to the savanna areas elephants, which have more like an Africa-shaped ear. They have 5 toenails on the front and 4 toenails on the back, which is actually looks more similar to an Asian elephant. And their diet is leaves, fruit, and bark, much like the savanna elephant, except for the fact that they will visit these massive openings that you can see here in the middle of the forest, where these clay areas are called bays, and they will get salts and minerals from that to supplement their diet. So these areas are amazing. Humans have inhabited these forests for tens of thousands of years. Today, it provides food, medicine, water, materials, and shelter for over 75 million people, and that has created its own threat. It's rich in wood, oil, minerals such as diamonds, gold, and coltan, which is a mineral used in cell phones. So next time you pick up your cell phone, think of the Congo rainforest. And the global demand for these materials is increasing day by day. So a large percentage of this concession of the Congo rainforest is under threat and has been earmarked for logging and for mining. This leads to more people, which leads to more strain on the environment, more bushmeat hunting, etc. So the animals go into these problems. And one of the facts that I read, which was fascinating, is how the deforestation of the Congo River, or the Congo rainforest, has a direct impact on the hurricane prevalence in North America, because the weather comes all the way across the Atlantic from that side. So one study found that deforestation of the Congo had local and remote effects, that the decreased evapotranspiration, so basically the trees sweating and getting rid of water, dropped, which led to an increase of temperature by 3 to 4 degrees centigrade and reduced precipitation by 50%. So massive impacts, an incredible area, all shoved into a very short amount of talking. But I'm going to hand back over to Matt, because he's going to tell us a little bit about the Okavango Delta and its impacts further down in the southern part.
Sure. No, it is the, I mean, that Congo, that whole Congo ecosystem. I mean, we both Rich and I have been extremely fortunate to spend a little bit of time just to the east of that, or Rich a lot more than myself, just to the east of that in Rwanda and Uganda, and spend time with these gorillas. But right next to that is the Virunga mountain range, and that runs in the very far eastern side of the Congo, and then the furthest eastern side of that Congo basin. And that civil unrest, and a lot of it has to do with what Rich is just saying about all these minerals and these resources that people want to get out of there, but to then sort of get around all of the permits and the government issues and everything, they just start conflict, so that if everyone's fighting, people can go in and take the stuff. And so, unfortunately, in that part of Africa, that's what's happening, and that's what Rich was talking about with the human conflict with these ecosystems. But moving down south towards the Okavango and the Zambezi. So if we take our journey from North Africa, from north of the equator, we had the Nile, and the Nile headwaters kind of mesh in with the very southern part of the Nile headwaters, mesh in with the very eastern part of the Congo basin, and the very southern part of the Congo basin will then join in with these two river systems. So the northern part of the Angolan highlands, that rushes down into the Congo basin, the southern part of the Angolan highlands, that then comes down into the Okavango River and the Okavango Delta. Both of them created by similar movements. The Okavango Delta a lot newer in time. It first started coming about 60 or 70,000 years ago. There was a slight move in tectonic plates and a little bit of an earthquake. And what happened was you had this river that was running into the northern part of the Kalahari Desert, down into the Khari salt pans in eastern Botswana, and then that would flow down into the Limpopo and the then after the Zambezi River, and that would then the Limpopo, the oldest river in Africa and in the world, and then into the Indian Ocean. But then there was the seismic shift, and the eastern plate lifted ever so slightly by maybe a couple of dozen feet, and this river, the Okavango River, then had nowhere to go. So it hit this wall and it just started fanning out. And if you go from the very northwestern to the very southeastern section of the Okavango Delta, there's a difference in elevation of less than 8 feet. So it's just over 2 meters, over 250 kilometers, which is, it's just, for something to be that flat and to have this incredible ecosystem, this inland oasis. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. You've got this inland oasis, this delta, this beautiful, rich water ecosystem slap bang in the middle of a desert. It makes no sense. But so you had this seismic, or this tectonic shift that created and started this. Now, every year, because the rain falls in Angola kind of around the November, December, January time period, the Okavango Delta floods after the rainy season. So March through June is at the height of the flood in the Okavango. So every year you have this ebb and flow, this up and down movement of water. Now, almost 70% of the islands in the entire Okavango Delta, of 150,000 odd islands, was created by termites. So termites, through the ages, through the 60,000 year history of the Okavango Delta, every year it would flood. The termites would, some of them would drown, some of them would continue. They would go to the top of their mounds, then it would drop, and then the termites would build a little bit higher. And obviously, if you've got an island here, whenever there's water running in from that island, as it runs around, the water gets slowed down. In slow water, sediment is allowed to drop, and as sediment drops, then the very next year, that's a little bit higher. That's a little bit higher, and as they get higher, they get larger and larger and larger. The biggest island in the entire Okavango Delta is called Chiefs Island. It's 70 kilometers, so what's that? Just over 30 miles long and about 15 kilometers wide, so 10 miles wide. That was not a termite mound. That was also tectonic movements, and a plate lifted up slightly, created this big island, Chiefs Island, right in the central northern parts of the Okavango Delta. But the rest of it, the rest of this incredible ecosystem, 70% of these islands was created by termites. You've got an incredibly biodiverse ecosystem, over 500 bird species that are it's a safe haven for North African, Central African, Eurasian migratory birds coming south into Southern Africa. We in South Africa, we get the carmine bee eaters as they pass through the Okavango Delta, a lot of the kingfishers. And it's just this incredibly rich ecosystem that floods every year and that drops every year. But much like with the Congo basin, with the Nile basin, with any river basin worldwide, when you have human impact at the source, so in the Angolan highlands, it has a huge negative impact further down. when you've got logging that goes on, when you have agriculture, when you have damming, etc., human habitation further up. Humans are obviously wanting to move to an area. They've got water, they've got land for growing crops, etc. Now you do that up north, and you've got this entire population that are living in the highlands and in the mountainous areas where the source of this river is. You're not as the same amount of water isn't going to reach this flood. And so over the course of the last 7 or 10 years or so, there's been an expedition team that have been going from the source to the end on mokoros, on these dugout canoes, and they've been fjording these channels and canals through the Okavango, trying to figure out how this water is moving. And over the last 3 or 4 years, with the exception of the last year, when flood levels rose back up to normal levels, they weren't able to get through a lot of these places. And that's just showing how over the years, this is an ecosystem that has remained and it was created and has been perfect for 60,000 years. And then you start putting human habitations. When we were hunter-gatherers and we moved around, there was no problem. Our populations weren't big enough to have settlements. Well, not settlements that could have as much a negative impact on these river systems. But now, over the last 50 or 100 years, a lot of these systems, the Congo, the Nile, and the Okavango, have started to lose condition because further upstream you've got these human habitations. But this is one of the most incredibly spectacular marvels in the natural world, is this inland delta, this oasis in the middle of the desert with this incredible biodiversity, and something just a little bit further north and east that was created by that same, because this is the very, very southern tip of the East African Rift, not the valley. The valley is further north, but that tectonic plate and that spine that it sits on, the very southern one is the Okavango Delta, just south of that. And just north of that is Victoria Falls, which I'm going to hand over to Rich to talk about now.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I just want to add a little bit about the Delta because it's such a special place. For me, it's like the Garden of Eden. And, you know, being able to experience so many different habitats and going there at 2 different times of the year, out of flood in the rainy season, it sounds so weird that the rainy season is the dry season for them. But out of flood, there's so much space. You just drive through all of this space, moving around, looking for game. And then the floods come in and these waters come up and create these islands, and all the animals are channeled onto these islands. And it makes for the most spectacular game viewing. And even, I see Matt put this beautiful photo of the lion running through. The lion's there, and lions hate water. They absolutely despise water. And these guys have just become accustomed to it. Now, with termites being a very big part of creating islands, there's another very important species, keystone species within the Delta, which makes sure that the channels stay open, and hippos play a massive role in this. Because hippos don't actually swim, they run along the base, they open up these reed pathways to stop any damming and allow channels to keep flowing and keep this water moving from place to place. So the perfection of this landscape that has been created in a geological blip on the time factor, 60,000 years is really a short amount of time, has all come to this fruition of beauty, incredible diversity, beautiful trees, incredible water. There's nothing quite like sitting on a mokoro in the water, looking down, and it's crystal clear, and poling your way through with the sound of nothing but nature around you. But talking about sound, carry on.
Just below that water level almost, and it's like you're in the water, like you're part of it. It's incredible.
Yeah. Totally. So with the idea of sound, we're going to talk about Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls, it's local name is Masiatunya, which means the smoke that thunders. You can hear these falls from miles away. It is just this constant rumble as massive amounts of water just keep flowing over it. And it's all pumped down by the Zambezi. And as Matt was saying, again, we'll look at this visual here. Here's the Okavango River that was flowing down into the Limpopo. And here's the upper Zambezi also coming down. And then this dike came through this whole uplift. And about 2 million years ago, it split off and sent the water in a different direction. And it actually got stuck at a point called the Makharikari pans, these pans over here that you can see. And it was this massive, massive, massive lake that filled up, and the water had nowhere to go. It just didn't go. Eventually, what ended up happening was there was a very large, wet, rainy season, and this caused the water to lift up and shoot down, and it started to push east all the way down towards the Indian Ocean. The Zambezi is the fourth largest river in Africa. That is about 1,600 miles long, so really good, and flows through 6 different countries with its source in Zambia again. So the Congo's in Zambia, the Congo River's in Zambia source, and the Zambezi. Now, the falls themselves are not the longest nor the tallest. At a width of just about 5,600 feet wide, and a height of just around 1,300 feet. Neither of them make it the highest or the widest, but the combination of those two factors makes it the largest water fall basically coming over, largest sheet of water falling over, all created by that tectonic movement. And it's an incredible place to be because you get these incredible rainbows that keep on coming along the way. And you can see how this water comes thundering down. But in the midst of all this chaos, through thousands of years of erosion, there is a pool called Devil's Pool, which sits just on the edge where you can look over and down into the falls, which is crazy. This is its location here. There's the arrow pointing to where Devil's Pools is. So you walk in, you come to a boat out here, and then you walk in and you lie down in this area. Definitely gets the heart pumping somewhat. And
have you done it, Rich?
No, I haven't, but I'm deadly keen to do it. Somebody offered it to me, but I thought twice about it. I had a kid on the way, so I thought I'll wait until they're older. So it's just one of those things. So this these wetter conditions, when they started going, it was about 20,000 years ago that the Zambezi then was forced off because of these wetter conditions to then follow a path towards the falls and then out to the ocean. Now, these falls are in grave danger. Last year, along with the Okavango Delta, there was a massive drought and there was a very little water coming in. The falls were nearly dry. I'm not sure if any of you saw any of the pictures through social media or anything that was going on, but Nat Geo announced that these extreme weather conditions were threatening the natural existence of these falls, that the falls could permanently dry up if we keep going the way we are. Rising temperatures are making things hotter and drier, and it's just the way it works. The Okavango Delta I visited last year, and it was dry. Literally water camps, the one camp I went to, the boats were just sitting on the floor where they normally have boating activities all year round. It was quite incredible because there was one animal called the Sitatunga, which is a very rare antelope that you hardly ever see because they live on these floating reed beds that move around the delta. And it was out in the open, in the dry, drinking from a water hole. I actually didn't know what it was when I got to the camp because I'd never seen one out in the open like that. So that's the falls. I think when we look at rivers and our impact on rivers, it is a place that we congregate as humans. Joburg, where I'm talking to you from now is one of the only big cities in the world that is not on a major river or on the ocean. We require water as a populace to be able to do things. And our use of water is having a major impact on these rivers and on the things that are going on in these rivers. Like we said, hydroelectricity, fantastic, let's go green, let's go sustainable with our electricity, but what happens to the fish in those areas? All these different impacts left and right that move us, and we have to be aware of as we're going through that. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, it's just, yeah, to echo what you just said is our impact. We often don't think we often think I'm one person, what is my impact going to do? But if you're one person in a city of 5 million and you're living right next to a river, or all along up the river, it's very easy for that impact to be accumulated. And yes, like we're seeing here, for the first time in recorded history, you've got the threat of the Victoria Falls drying up. When I say recorded history, I'm talking in the last 100 or 120 years. Obviously, you have 100, 150-year droughts, and it would have dried up once before. But in our memory, this is the first time, and these are reasons that have been brought on by our behavior. Things like the Okavango Delta, that is directly related to us. The Nile Delta not being able to be the extent of what it once was, that's directly us. The Congo Basin, exactly directly us. Every single one of these, our activities have a direct impact on what these rivers are doing. And something that has taken 100 million years or 20, I mean, the Nile River is 60 million years old, 3 or 4 times older than what it was thought 100 years or 50 years ago. You've got a 60 million year old river that's carved its way through these huge basaltic mountainous tops in Ethiopia and granite rocks. And we're putting a dam in the middle of it and it's stopping it. And so things like that, they might help a population initially with like electricity, etc., but it's the long-term effects. And that's what we're seeing here with the Victoria Falls, with the Okavango Delta. And so much like a lot of our previous webinars for Rich and I, it's an ongoing theme of what our planet needs at the moment and what we've been doing to it. And moving forward, water is the one resource that we can't live without it. And it's something that we've got to protect, but then also the wild places that this water lies within.
My one lecturer at university, the first day I walked into my geography lecture, he said to us, water is the most important thing on the planet, and the way we're going, the next world war will be over water. But enough preaching. Kendall, do you have any questions for us?
I do have some questions for you guys. First, I'd like to remind everyone watching, if you have a question for Rich or Matt, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. All right, could an emphasis on wind and solar power help to lessen the rush to hydropower, which affects the wildlife that depends on the water?
Yeah, I think there's a balance in everything. We have to find a balance in everything, because wind has impacts on birds. I mean, if we really went nitpicky and went as green as we could, nothing in the world would be good enough besides going back to being hunter-gatherers. That's the only way we're really going to get back to 0.0. And solar requires space. So where do you put that space? Where do you find the space to put out these massive areas? So I think a balance between it and a way of figuring out and mitigating the impacts of it will make for a better place. If we don't make a place that creates money for local people, that forest, that water doesn't have the value to be kept and to be looked after.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too.
So sort of related to that, are there any efforts to remove dams along any of these rivers?
Not that I know of, no.
Unfortunately, water is such a scarce resource, specifically in Africa. If we look, I'm going to go back to this map. As green and blue as it looks here, the area around the equator where my cursor is here is very well watered. There's a lot of water, and then obviously along these tributaries and along the bits through the rainforest, that's cool. As soon as we go further south and further north, these areas are all incredibly dry, and these dams are lifelines for a lot of people. So even when I think of places that I've worked in reserves where you have these carved out rivers that only flow very intermittently after huge storms, those rivers would have flown much more, but all these little dams, people need to farm, people need to do different things. And it's about finding that balance, again, the triple bottom line: economy, environment, and social, and finding those three and putting them together so you have as little impact on those areas as possible.
Okay, could you, I don't know if this is getting kind of outside your wheelhouse, but while you're on the subject of that map, could you discuss at all just the circulation of water around the globe and how that contributes to the water supplies of these African rivers?
Well, a lot of these rainforests actually you can watch them create their own weather patterns and weather systems. So they have these lungs that are breathing. That constantly is evapotranspiration, and then it comes straight back down. So a lot of them are creating that. You've got like Lake Victoria is the second largest freshwater lake in the world, second only to Lake Superior in North America. So it's this massive lake that constantly gets replenished by these underground aquifers, but then also by these rainforests and all of these basins in the center. Because if you look at the Nile River and you look at the difference in elevation, the topography from the source down to the sea, it's a massive change in elevation. And so the whole of Central Africa, with the exception of the sort of western part of the Congo basin, are these mountains. So you've got these rainforests that breathe, then it rains down, catchments, massive catchment areas, and then you've also got weather systems coming off of certainly off of the hot Indian Ocean, off the east coast of Africa. That brings a lot of rainfall for most of East Africa. And so a lot of these systems are creating their own weather patterns.
So again, just to elaborate on that, if we look at the equator here, there's a thing called Coriolis force. We're going to get a little technical. What I was talking about with the Congo basin, there is a southwest trade wind that blows from the equator up and towards the States and towards the North America. And we have another one which keeps on going in that same direction up this way. We have one coming down from the equator, the northeast trade wind coming down and hitting Africa. And what that does is we have a lot of cyclones that hit Madagascar, and Madagascar acts as a big buffer for Mozambique and South Africa in terms of cyclones, which is just a hurricane turning the other way. But forests create their own weather. The evapotranspiration that we were talking about creates more clouds and more rain, and more clouds and more rain, and that moves around the globe. So if you look at all the big forests around the world, they all impact weather patterns based on what the forest is actually doing. And there is a tipping point where once you remove a certain point, and if I'm not mistaken from the last bit I read with the Amazon, we're not far away from that tipping point, yeah, where its weather patterns will be completely and forever changed to take it away from being a rainforest. So, you know, these forests play a massive role in water movement around the planet. Nothing in this world is separated, as much as we like to think they are.
Okay, so while we're on the subject of weather patterns, do you know if meteorologists are forecasting a continuing drought in southern Africa, or is there reason to believe that the rains will return in 2021? And on that subject, when is a good time to visit the Okavango Delta?
Okay, so
So,
I'll
I mean, the droughts that we're looking at, typically in a lot of southern Africa, we've gone through sort of 10-year cycles. So you go through a 10-year dry period and a 10-year wetter period, a 10-year dry period, and those are broken up by your 50 and your 100-year flood levels. So after a 10-year drought, you would have an extensive flood for the start of your wetter years. Now, all that's happening is those timeframes are being stretched. So they're being elongated and lengthened to not just being a 10-year drought or a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year drought. They're just a little bit longer now. So it'll be a little bit more extreme for a bit longer. But I mean, the Okavango Delta was in dire straits earlier this year, and then the floods are up. And it's not flowing back to full capacity, but it's certainly a lot better than it was the year before. So we might be seeing a transition now into coming back into a slightly wetter next couple of years. Certainly where I'm sitting at the moment in my home in White River, which is adjacent to the Kruger National Park. We've had over the last 2 years, we've had more rain than has been recorded in the 5 before that. So I do think that we are moving slightly more into a wetter period. And for the Okavango Delta, it really depends on what it is that you're going for. For a more water-based activity schedule, you're looking at the earlier part of the season, so your March, June, July. If you want something slightly more land-based and you want to see the animals spread out and not congregated on all of these islands, then later in the year. Wouldn't you agree with that, Rich?
Yeah, definitely. I think the delta's beauty in the drier or the rainy period are the storms. The storms are magnificent to see rolling through, and they're scattered all over these isolated thunder showers moving through the area. Makes for beautiful photography and birding. Birds are thick and fast because it's wet season, it's summer, it's good times. But the rains have come up, and even in our Southern Africa, South Africa place, we've had extensive rains over the last little bit. We've had our dry period, and droughts play their role. We all go, oh my God, it's a drought. We don't know what they were like, or we do, but we never look at it in that way. When we're here, we look at everything as a microcosm, as it is right now, not over time, not in the greater scheme. And a drought is a very important thing for thinning things out, getting rid of weak genetics. Nature is brutal, and the brutality is beautiful if you look at it in the greater scheme. So by drying things out, you get rid of the weak genetics. When the new rains come in and everything comes back, only the strong will survive, and they will then procreate. You get this proliferation of strong genetics moving through. It also impacts trees and bush encroachment. And what we found with raising greenhouse gases, specifically carbon dioxide, is bush encroachment. Trees, the growth of trees in the savanna areas has gone higher over the last few years in an attempt of nature to try and create a carbon sink and pull that carbon out of the atmosphere, which then impacts environment. So droughts clear those areas too. So everything has its place. It's just we're not able to adapt to it like nature does. Nature will keep going. We just will have a problem if we have crops and things like that that don't work.
So that's a good segue to the next question is, what do the animals do when the Okavango Delta becomes completely dry? Where do they go?
I mean, historically they would have moved. So one of the major migratory routes in southern Africa was from the sort of huge floodplains of southern Mozambique, and then the Okavango Delta, and the sort of the stretch of river north of that, going through to Victoria Falls in the Zambezi floodplains east of that. Now, we've put political boundaries in the way, and we've put fences up, and we've put roads, and we've put power lines and everything. So all of those migratory routes would have been restricted. And like Richard was saying, when you've got nature adapt. So let's say you have a herd of 1,000 elephants that is in the southern part of Mozambique, and they then want to go north to the Okavango Delta, or vice versa, and back down. They've got to go through these massive tracts, or these huge tracts of land, without much food, etc., and that will thin out the herd. But now you've put these boundaries in the way, there isn't too much movement that can be had. So recently, and there are 6 southern African countries that have started this massive biosphere, let's call it that, between Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, I think Malawi and Mozambique, where around essentially the Zambezi River, Victoria Falls, Lower Zambezi Valley, and the Okavango Delta, they're creating this one big conservancy. There's one in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, where there's one big conservancy. And so that's the plan moving forward, is to try and interconnect a lot of these disconnected island game reserves, that animals can then move freely from one to the next, to allow some of those ancient migratory routes to then start taking place again. And that would then aid with something like when the Okavango Delta dries up, those animals can then move into the Zambezi floodplain. And then from there, when it comes back, they can move back, and vice versa. And so there's a lot more free movement of animals in the future, in the next decade or two, because a lot of these projects, they've been sitting in the wings for the last 20 or 30 years, and as funding comes through, slowly do they then start to incorporate more and more areas.
I think the other thing that we've got to realize again, and we're coming back to rivers and its importance in our lives as humans, is that we use them. And most migratory routes were along rivers, because you had a constant water flow. So what you're doing is you need to create these corridors, not in random places, but along these rivers. But then you're impacting people. So where do the people get the water from? Where do you move them? Do you move them? Is it right to move those people for the animals? You know, that's where you're starting to get this push and pull. Plus then the geopolitical situation throughout Africa is tenuous at the best times. And Zambia is going through a bit of a crazy time. Zimbabwe is nowhere at the moment. South Africa is up and down. We're all trying to fight to keep our own countries going, let alone talk to a country next door to say, yeah, sure, let your elephants through. Pull in, come.
Yeah.
You know, this is
some of our water. It's no problem.
Yeah, exactly. So these are the real world situation problem, or the problems that we face, rather than worrying about wildlife.
Okay. So there were a couple people who were curious if you could give us a little more information on the proposed damming of the Okavango in Angola.
Did it, Matt? At the moment, I've only heard the latest thing that I heard was the proposed drilling in the Okavango Delta, underneath the delta. I haven't heard any new movement on any damming in Angola. Have you heard anything, Rich?
No, I think any impact to the delta, however small it may be, it might not be a massive dam, but in those tributaries, you start putting little dams for each little farm to be able to sustain itself. it all has a knock-on effect by the end of the time it gets down to the delta. So that is a huge thing, but the fracking the oil that they're wanting to do down in the delta itself, and I think it's almost gone through, is a huge problem. It could spell absolute disaster for that entire ecosystem, which would be sad to lose the Garden of Eden.
Mm. Well, that's a good segue to the last question I'm going to take today, which is in terms of revenue benefits for jurisdictions where these rivers are located, where does ecotourism rank in comparison to the extraction of natural resources?
I think short-term mining and the extraction of resources is always it trumps it. That's why people go in, because you can get money immediately. Tourism is something that you will sustainably do forever over time and still create it. So it will create more economic viability through tourism, but short term, people are always wanting to get a quick buck and help shareholders. So that's my feeling. Matt, what's your feeling on that, bud?
Exactly the same. But when you've got, like, if you were to look at the 4 river systems that we were talking about, tourism would be a lot more significantly impacted in the final 2 than in the first 2. So the Okavango and the Zambezi, those water systems, tourism is the long-term sustainable. It's a model that's going to keep on keeping on. The Congo and the Nile, the ecotourism in both of those areas wouldn't be affected as badly as in the other 2 for mining, for anything like that. It's more the human impact. What is going to happen to the people and the entire ecosystems on those river systems if we are to cut the trees down, go mining, and build dams? For ecotourism, the biggest impact would be on the final 2, on the Okavango and the Zambezi with Victoria Falls.
And again, lastly, just to jump in there, that the Congo is one place that is unique because it is like the Amazon. There's only so much tourism that can be done because you cannot get in there. It is inaccessible in a lot of places. But mining will go in there. They'll spend the money to go get the resources out. Tourism won't, because it's hard, it's tougher to get in, and it needs to remain wild. So where do you put the monetary value on that thing?
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to call it for questions. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you staying up late to present. This was really interesting. So I'm going to turn it back over to you for closing comments, and we'll start with Matt.
Thanks, Kendall, and thanks, Nat, having the WWF for having us yet again, and thanks to everyone for tuning in today in the States and tonight for Rich and I. It's always a pleasure, and we hope that you all enjoyed tonight and that maybe learned something new about one of our great African rivers that you didn't know before. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks from my side, Kendall, NatHab, WWF, and to all of you that watched. It really is awesome that we can connect from so far away, and I really hope that we get to do this all in person very soon. 2020, may 2021 be a spectacular year, and everyone have a wonderful festive season and New Year's.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much, guys. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us on Monday for our next Daily Dose. Keep an eye out for our Sunday e-news announcement and check out our website for the current lineup. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great weekend. Good night, guys.
Bye, guys.
Good night. Thanks, guys.